du meine Arbeit für richtig hältst, ob du glaubst, dass ich fleißig gewesen bin, dass ich gearbeitet habe, dass ich mich in diesen Jahren für dich eingesetzt habe.
You're holding a stack of money so thick you can barely wrap your arms around it, and it's not enough to buy a loaf of bread. You walk past a newspaper stand, and the price printed on the front page is already wrong, because by the time the ink dried, the currency lost value again. Now imagine living in that world, angry, embarrassed, frightened, while armed men march in your streets, politicians trade blame like currency, and the idea of normal life feels like a story from another country. And then, into that chaos steps a man who doesn't offer a plan so much as a promise. I can explain your pain. I can name the guilty. I can fix it, if you give me power. This is the story of how Adolf Hitler rose, step by step, through crisis, propaganda, violence, and elite miscalculation, until democracy didn't collapse all at once, but was dismantled piece by piece, with cheering crowds outside and paperwork on the inside. Let's rewind, because Germany's catastrophe didn't begin with Hitler. It began with a nation that transformed too fast, fought too hard, and lost too completely. Germany unified in 1871, newly stitched together after the Franco-Prussian War, and what followed was one of the most dizzying accelerations in modern European history. Within decades, the German Empire became a scientific and industrial powerhouse. Steel, chemicals, electrical engineering, railways, modern universities, an economy that looked like the future.
But politically, it wasn't built like a modern democracy. It was a state where hierarchy mattered. A hereditary Kaiser at the top, a strong executive culture, and a society that prized discipline, obedience, and national prestige. Here's the tension that matters for what comes later. Germany modernized economically faster than it modernized politically. So you get a country filled with modern mass society, huge cities, newspapers, unions, class conflict, while its political reflexes remain deeply authoritarian and militarized. And abroad, German confidence hardened into ambition. Leaders demanded a place in the sun, colonies, influence, a blue-water navy. That helped intensify Europe's great power competition, imperial rivalries, naval arms races, and alliance blocs that looked stable right up until they weren't. The continent was becoming a locked room, with everyone quietly stocking matches. Hitler wasn't born in Berlin. He was born on April 20th, 1889, in Braunau am Inn, a small Austrian border town near Germany. And his early life, despite how Nazi propaganda later mythologized it, was not a clear origin story of destiny. It's messier, more ordinary, and in some ways more revealing. He clashed with his strict father, bonded intensely with his mother, performed unevenly in school, and developed a deep hunger for recognition. He didn't just want a job, he wanted meaning, status, and a kind of chosen identity. As a young man, he went to Vienna, dreaming of becoming an artist. He applied to the Academy of Fine Arts and was rejected, an experience he later framed as a defining injustice. Vienna mattered, but not as a single lightning bolt moment where he became Hitler. Vienna was a pressure cooker. Mass politics, demagogues, ethnic nationalism, and anti-Semitic rhetoric circulating openly in a modern city. It offered him a toolbox: how to blame, how to simplify, how to perform outrage, and how to turn resentment into identity. And it gave him something else, a target. Not a specific person yet, more like an idea that societies can be explained through enemies. In 1913, Hitler moved to Munich, drawn to what he imagined as real Germany. When World War I broke out in 1914, he volunteered for the German army, even though he was Austrian-born. The war gave him structure, belonging, and, most dangerously, an emotional home. He served on the Western Front, often as a messenger, a role that could mean moving through artillery fire and chaos. He was decorated, wounded, and later temporarily blinded after being gassed near the end of the war. But the war's meaning for him wasn't just military, it was spiritual. Like many veterans, he remembered the early days of 1914 as a mythic moment when internal divisions vanished and the nation felt united. One people, one purpose, one destiny. That myth, the nation purified by struggle, became addictive. And then it shattered. Germany's collapse in 1918 wasn't experienced as a slow, understandable defeat by everyone. After years of propaganda insisting victory was possible, the armistice of 11 November hit like a trapdoor opening. Then came revolution. The Kaiser was gone. The old order fell. A republic was declared. And in 1919 came the Treaty of Versailles. Among its most explosive provisions was Article 231, often called the War Guilt Clause, though it functions as a statement of responsibility used as legal groundwork for reparations. The text is blunt. The Allied governments affirm and Germany accepts responsibility for causing all the loss and damage suffered due to the war. And crucially, inside Germany, it was widely received not as legal language, but as moral humiliation and official branding of national shame. Versailles also imposed territorial losses and strict military limits, an army capped at 100,000 men, creating a feeling that Germany was being permanently locked into weakness. This matters because humiliation isn't just an emotion. In politics, humiliation is fuel, especially when someone shows up offering a story that transforms shame into anger. In this atmosphere, conspiracy theories spread like wildfire. The most infamous was the stab in the back myth, the claim that Germany had not been defeated militarily, but betrayed by internal enemies, often framed as socialists, Republicans, and Jews. It wasn't universally believed, but it was politically useful because it redirected despair away from the war's real architects and towards scapegoats who could be targeted and dehumanized. And here's what makes conspiracy myths so powerful. They don't just explain the past, they prescribe a future. If defeat came from betrayal, then national recovery requires purging traitors. That logic is a bridge from disappointment to violence. The early Weimar Republic didn't get a calm childhood, it got a knife fight. There were assassinations, attempted coups, street battles, paramilitary formations, Freikorps units, veteran groups with weapons and grudges moved through politics like storm weather. Democracy existed, yes, but the culture around it was often anti-democratic. Many elites tolerated the republic rather than believed in it. And then the economy began to unravel. Inflation started during World War I when the government borrowed heavily rather than raising taxes. After 1919, the pressures of debt, political instability, and reparations worsened the spiral. The crisis detonated in 1923, especially after French and Belgian forces occupied the Ruhr when Germany fell behind on payments. The German government supported passive resistance and kept paying workers, often by printing more money. Hyperinflation became so extreme it turned daily life into a horror story. By November 1923, the exchange rate reached about 4.2 trillion marks to $1. And when money breaks, society breaks with it. Because money isn't just currency, it's trust, it's time. It's the belief that your work today will matter tomorrow. Stabilization eventually came with a new currency and international restructuring, most famously the Dawes Plan, which reorganized payment schedules and helped bring in foreign loans to stabilize the system. But the psychological damage lingered. People who lost savings didn't just lose money, they lost faith in the Republic. And in Munich, in that same post-war chaos, Hitler found his opening. After the war, Hitler stayed in the military environment of a reduced Reichswehr. In 1919, he was sent to observe a tiny nationalist group, the German Workers' Party. He didn't just report on it, he joined. And what he brought wasn't policy expertise, it was performance. He could fuse personal grievance with national humiliation, then add scapegoats, then wrap it all in a promise of rebirth. He didn't argue like a professor, he accused like a prosecutor. In 1920,
the movement rebranded as the NSAP, the Nazi Party. Around Hitler formed an ecosystem: street enforcers, propagandists, ambitious rivals. The SA, the stormtroopers, provided intimidation, turning meetings into controlled violence. Other future leaders rose in the orbit: Goering, Goebbels, Himmler. The movement offered belonging and identity, but defined that identity through exclusion, especially anti-Semitic racial ideology. And then Hitler looked south, to Italy. In 1922, Benito Mussolini's March on Rome showed that a mass movement plus elite fear could produce a transfer of power. Hitler watched closely. In Germany's 1923 chaos, he tried to force history to copy Italy.
On the night of 8-9 November 1923, Hitler and armed followers stormed a Munich beer hall and attempted to coerce Bavarian authorities into backing a march on Berlin. The coup collapsed after a confrontation with police. Gunfire ended the march and scattered the movement. Hitler was arrested and tried for high treason. And this is one of the first great turning points. The trial should have ended him. Instead, it became his national stage. He used the courtroom to perform patriotism, martyrdom, and defiance, turning failure into publicity. He was sentenced to prison, but in lenient conditions, and served only a fraction of the term. And there, behind bars, he began writing the blueprint. In prison, Hitler dictated Mein Kampf, part autobiography, part ideology, part strategy manual. Its core claims are chilling in their clarity: history as racial struggle, democracy as weakness, propaganda as a tool to shape reality through simplicity, repetition, and emotional targeting. And after prison, he pivoted.
The lesson of 1923 wasn't violence is wrong, it was premature violence without institutional leverage fails. So he pursued a legal route: build a mass party, contest elections, use the system's weaknesses, especially emergency powers and elite backroom deals, to dismantle democracy from within. Meanwhile, the mid-1920s brought fragile stabilization, sometimes called Weimar's golden years. Nazi support stagnated. In 1928, they were still fringe at the national level. So what changed? The world cracked. After 1929, international credit tightened, and American lenders pulled back from Germany. The recovery, partly built on foreign loans, was exposed as fragile.
Businesses failed, banks trembled, unemployment surged into the millions. And desperation doesn't automatically create Nazis, but it expands the market for movements that offer certainty, revenge, and someone to blame. The Nazis presented themselves as everything to everyone: anti-communist enough for conservatives and business owners, revolutionary enough for the disillusioned, modern enough to feel unstoppable. Their rallies were choreographed to manufacture belonging: uniforms, banners, chants, marching columns, spectacle designed to make individuals feel absorbed into a force of history. Opponents were harassed and attacked, while propaganda framed Nazi violence as self-defense against chaos. By 1932, the Nazis became the largest party in the Reichstag, still not an outright majority, but a terrifying signal: the Republic was bleeding legitimacy. And then came the most fatal mistake: not by voters, but by elites.
Hitler did not seize power alone through a clean democratic mandate. He became chancellor on 30 January 1933 through appointment and political deal-making. Conservative elites believed they could use his popularity while controlling him, boxing him in with cabinet constraints, tradition, and the authority of President Hindenburg. They thought they were hiring a tool. They were opening a door. And once inside, Hitler moved fast, using crisis as a crowbar. After the Reichstag fire, Hitler's government pushed emergency measures that crushed civil liberties and enabled mass arrests of political opponents. The Reichstag fire decree restricted freedoms and allowed the Nazi state to override legal protections in the name of security. Then came the Enabling Act, which transferred legislative power to Hitler's cabinet, effectively gutting parliament.
This is how dictatorships often form in modern states: not only through street violence, but through emergency law, framed as temporary, sold as necessary, and used permanently. What followed was Gleichschaltung, the coordination of German institutions. Political parties were banned or dissolved, independent unions were crushed and replaced with Nazi-controlled structures, regional governments were subordinated, the civil service was purged. Terror was not incidental, it was method. Intimidation and surveillance turned daily life into a test of conformity, while propaganda turned conformity into a virtue. And Hitler didn't just destroy opponents, he also eliminated rivals inside his own movement, because power is jealous. The SA had helped the Nazis rise, but its leader Ernst Röhm and others became liabilities, too radical, too independent, too threatening to the army and conservative allies. So Hitler purged them.
In the Night of the Long Knives, beginning June 30, 1934, the regime murdered SA leaders and other perceived threats, consolidating control and reassuring the army that Hitler was order, not chaos. Then, when Hindenburg died later in 1934, Hitler merged the presidency and chancellorship, demanding loyalty not to a constitution, but to himself. The dictatorship was complete. And now the ideology could become policy at full speed. The Nazi worldview, racial hierarchy, and anti-Semitic conspiracy thinking was translated into law and administration. Jewish Germans were pushed out of professions, then out of public life, then out of legal protection, step by step, normalized through bureaucracy and propaganda. Meanwhile, Hitler rearmed Germany, openly defying the Versailles framework, and pursued expansion that would ignite World War II. The rebirth promised in Nazi rhetoric was in practice a militarized state demanding total obedience, moving toward catastrophic war and genocide. If there's a central lesson here, it's not that Hitler rose by hypnosis. Charisma mattered, but it worked because crises created receptive audiences. Propaganda exploited real fears, paramilitary violence terrorized opponents, and influential institutions repeatedly chose short-term advantage over democratic principle. A modern dictatorship doesn't arrive only with boots in the street. It also arrives with paperwork, with emergency decrees, with temporary measures, with normalized hate, with the slow corrosion of truth, until people can't tell the difference between reality and the story they're being sold. And the most haunting part? At many points, it didn't look inevitable. It looked manageable, until it wasn't.